February 18th, 2001, began like any other Daytona Sunday. The Florida sun blazed down on nearly 200,000 fans packed into Daytona International Speedway, their voices merging into a constant roar that matched the engines below. But what unfolded during those final laps would forever separate NASCAR history into two distinct eras, before that afternoon and after. Dale Earnhardt's death wasn't just the loss of a driver. It was the loss of American motorsport's last true outlaw, a man who had built his legend on intimidation and an almost supernatural connection to his machine. Yet beneath the familiar narrative of that tragic day lie details so startling they reshape everything you thought you understood about the sport's darkest hour. Long before the green flag dropped, unsettling omens had already begun appearing around Earnhardt, like ghosts at a celebration. During a routine television interview on Friday, February 16th, the man known as the Intimidator did something completely out of character. Sitting alongside his friend Darrell Waltrip, Earnhardt suddenly grew emotional, visibly, undeniably emotional. "I've got it all," he declared, his voice carrying a weight that made seasoned crew members shift uncomfortably. "I'm a lucky man." Those who had worked with Earnhardt for decades had never witnessed such vulnerability from a man who famously treated media obligations as necessary evils. Waltrip later admitted in his autobiography that he felt a chill run down his spine during that moment, though he couldn't explain why at the time. Even more disturbing was what happened the following night. Earnhardt met with fellow driver Terry Labonte to discuss a business deal, something they had done countless times before without incident. But as the meeting concluded, Earnhardt made a comment so peculiar that everyone in the room fell silent. Referring to their proposed venture, he muttered, "That's if I make it that far." When laughter failed to follow his words, Labonte looked up to find Earnhardt staring blankly at the wall, his face expressionless. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Labonte would later describe the moment as like someone else was talking through him. Dale Earnhardt Jr. experienced his own premonition on race morning when his father approached him with uncharacteristic tenderness. "We're going to do this together," the elder Earnhardt said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of physical affection so rare that Jr. would replay that moment thousands of times in the years to come. Perhaps the most devastating revelation to emerge from the tragedy involves a simple piece of equipment that could have changed everything. In the 12 months leading up to February 2001, 3 promising young drivers, Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin Jr., and Tony Roper, had died from the exact same injury, basilar skull fracture, where the skull separates catastrophically from the spinal column during rapid deceleration. Engineers had developed a solution called the Hans device, head and neck support, a carbon fiber yoke that rested on the driver's shoulders and tethered to the helmet, preventing the head from whipping forward upon impact. But Earnhardt wanted nothing to do with it. His rejection wasn't based on ignorance, but on something far more complex, a racer's intuition that had saved his life dozens of times before. "I ain't wearing that damn noose," he famously told reporters, viewing the device as restrictive and uncomfortable. What few people knew was that Earnhardt had secretly tested an early version of head and neck restraint years earlier and found it limited his peripheral vision, a non-negotiable liability at 200 miles per hour. His mechanic Danny Chocolate Myers revealed years later that Earnhardt had also survived a previous crash precisely because he could move his head freely, further cementing his distrust of restraints. The tragic irony, of course, is that the crash that killed him was survivable with the Hans device. Of the 43 drivers on the grid that day, only 5 wore one. Among them was Kyle Petty, still grieving his son Adam's death from the same injury that would claim Earnhardt hours later. What transforms this story from simple tragedy to profound heartbreak is the reason Earnhardt found himself in harm's way during those final laps. For the first time in his 22-year career, the man who had built his reputation on winning at any cost wasn't racing for himself. He had become a guardian angel on wheels, determined to deliver victory to 2 people he loved, his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. and his close friend Michael Waltrip, who drove for Earnhardt's own racing team. The strategy was audacious. With Waltrip leading and Jr. running second, Earnhardt positioned his black number 3 Chevrolet directly behind them, using his car as a moving blockade against the charging pack. What happened on lap 183 shocked everyone watching. Earnhardt briefly took the lead, his instinct screaming at him to stay there, but then deliberately lifted off the throttle, allowing Waltrip to pass him. The crowd gasped. Commentators stammered. This was like watching a shark refuse to bite. For 17 agonizing laps, Earnhardt drove the most dangerous race of his life, swerving across the track at 180 miles per hour, closing every gap, shutting down every passing opportunity. Sterling Marlin, Rusty Wallace, and Ken Schrader all tried to find a way around him. None succeeded. But in executing this selfless strategy, Earnhardt had placed himself in the worst possible position, directly in the path of chaos, with nowhere to go when disaster struck. The actual collision lasted less time than it takes to blink. As the field thundered into turn 4 on the final lap, Marlin made one last desperate move to the inside. Earnhardt dropped down to block, a move he had executed successfully thousands of times. But this time, his car hadn't completely cleared Marlin's nose. The contact was almost imperceptible, a feather-light tap that would have gone unnoticed in any other context. Yet that slight touch was enough. Earnhardt's car veered left onto the flat apron, the tires losing grip on the painted surface. For a fraction of a second, it appeared he might save it. The nose began correcting, pointing back toward the racing line. But physics had already made its decision. When Earnhardt's car shot back up the banking, it traveled directly into the path of Ken Schrader's machine. The impact sent both cars careening toward the concrete wall at nearly 160 miles per hour. What television viewers saw looked routine, a typical restrictor plate crash, the kind drivers walked away from every weekend. But the angle of Earnhardt's impact was a nightmare scenario, not head-on, which the car was designed to absorb, but at a diagonal that subjected his body to forces nature never intended. In 80 milliseconds, 8/100ths of a second, the car decelerated by over 40 miles per hour, generating nearly 60 gs of force. The left lap belt, already weakened from years of use and improperly installed, snapped clean apart. Earnhardt's body slammed to the right, his head continuing forward with nothing to stop it. The basilar skull fracture occurred instantly. What happened at Halifax Medical Center in the hour following the crash reveals depths of humanity that official reports never captured. Dr. Steve Bohannon led the trauma team, working furiously to reinflate collapsed lungs and pump blood back into a body that had already begun shutting down. 15 medical professionals surrounded Earnhardt, their movements choreographed with desperate precision. But they knew. Bohannon had seen enough blunt force trauma to recognize the signs. Blood from the ears, no gag reflex, no respiratory effort. The chance of survival, he would later admit, was almost zero. Then came the moment that still haunts those who witnessed it. As a hospital technician prepared to remove Earnhardt's wedding ring, standard procedure for preparing a body, a voice from the corner of the room stopped everything. Teresa Earnhardt, Dale's wife, had been standing silently against the wall, watching the impossible unfold. "No," she said. "Just one word." The technician froze, unsure how to proceed. Dr. Bohannon looked at Teresa, then at the technician, and gave the only order that made sense. "Do what she says." That ring remained on Dale Earnhardt's finger. It was a small act of defiance against the machinery of death, a wife's refusal to let protocol erase the final connection to her husband. Dale Earnhardt Jr. arrived minutes later, took one look at the trauma team's body language, and understood everything. The sound that escaped him, he later described as not human, a wail of sorrow, fear, and shock combined into something primal. NASCAR's official investigation revealed the full horror: broken ribs, a fractured sternum, a broken ankle, and a fatal basilar skull fracture that had claimed 3 young drivers before him. Blood covered nearly every interior surface of the number 3 car, a grim testament to violence that lasted less than 1 second but left permanent scars on the sport. In the immediate aftermath, NASCAR President Mike Helton faced the cameras with the weight of an industry on his shoulders. "We've lost Dale Earnhardt," he said, his voice cracking. It was the first time many fans learned that what they had witnessed was not another miraculous escape. But here's what most people still don't understand. Earnhardt's death changed everything. Within months, the Hans device went from optional equipment to mandatory safety gear. The development of the car of tomorrow accelerated dramatically. Soft walls, steel and foam barriers designed to absorb impact, began appearing at tracks across the country. The safer barrier, now standard at every major oval, exists because Earnhardt's head struck a concrete wall that had no give whatsoever. His death accomplished in an instant what years of lobbying and data could not. It forced a culture of invincibility to confront its own mortality. Every driver racing today owes their life to the fact that Dale Earnhardt died on that February afternoon. It is a legacy written in blood, paid for by a man who never wanted to wear a noose, but whose sacrifice loosened the grip of death on everyone who followed. The Intimidator, in his final act, intimidated an entire sport into saving itself.